You know, every great story has a beginning. But what if that beginning wasn't just about what happened, but about an encounter? We're about to dive into the very first pages of the Bible, and what we're going to find is an origin story that sets the stage for, well, everything. It introduces the core promises and the central conflicts that ripple through the rest of the book. Okay, before we jump in, we've got to get one thing straight. The Bible isn't just a single book. It's way more like a library. We're talking about a collection of 66 different works. You've got history, poetry, prophecy, you name it, all written by tons of different authors over more than 1,000 years.
And this library is basically split into two big sections. First, you have the Old Testament, which has 39 books. Think of this as the foundation for the entire story. Then comes the New Testament with its 27 books, which builds on that foundation, telling the story of Jesus and what happened next. But here's the key. They're meant to be read together. It's all one single, sweeping story about God's relationship with humanity. So, where does this grand narrative kick off? Well, the story opens not with chaos or fighting, with incredible beauty and order. It paints a picture of a perfect world, and then places a single, massive choice right in the hands of the very first people.
The whole creation story unfolds with this really beautiful, poetic rhythm. First, God brings order out of nothingness, creating the heavens and the earth. He separates light from darkness, he forms the land and the seas, and then he just fills this brand new world with life. And the absolute pinnacle of it all, humanity. Adam and Eve placed in a perfect garden paradise called Eden. So in this paradise, there was just one rule. That's it. Do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But, well, humanity chose to go its own way. And that single choice, that one act of disobedience, it changed everything. It introduced shame and sin, and it fractured that perfect relationship between God and his creation. And the consequences of that brokenness, they escalate tragically and fast. Adam and Eve's sons, Cain and Abel, both bring offerings to God. But when Abel's is favored, Cain's jealousy just explodes into rage, and he murders his own brother. This is the very first act of human-on-human violence in the entire story. As people spread across the earth, the story says that violence and corruption just grew and grew. The world became so broken that God decided on a hard reset, a way to wash it all clean and offer a fresh start. So for this reset, God's plan focuses on one man he finds righteous, a guy named Noah. God tells him to build a gigantic boat, an ark, and to bring his family and pairs of every single animal on board. And then the flood comes, rain for 40 days and 40 nights, covering the entire world, with only the life inside the ark being saved. But right after this incredible act of judgment comes an equally incredible act of grace. Once the waters go down, God makes a solemn promise. The Bible calls it a covenant, with Noah and all of humanity. And a covenant is way more than a simple promise. It's a binding relational agreement. He vows to never again wipe out the world with a flood, and he seals that promise with a rainbow in the clouds. But humanity's pride, it just doesn't stay down for long. United by a single language, the people decide to build a huge city and a tower, the famous Tower of Babel, to make a name for themselves, to reach the heavens on their own terms. And in response, God confuses their languages, which forces them to scatter all across the earth. Now, this scattering is a huge turning point in the whole story. God's whole approach shifts. Instead of dealing with humanity all at once, he starts a new plan. He's going to focus on just one man and one family to begin the work of fixing the world. God calls out to a man named Abram, who he later renames Abraham, and he makes him this unbelievable promise. He tells him, "Leave your home, leave everything you know, and I will make you the father of a great nation, and through you I will bless the entire world." This is God making the first move, a huge one. Now, you have to understand, this promise sounded impossible. Abraham and his wife Sarah were old, like way past the age of having kids. But against all logic, they chose to trust God. Their faith, that human response to God's call, was rewarded with the birth of a son, Isaac. And through him, the promise would finally start to unfold. So how exactly does this one family become a whole nation? Well, that promise made to Abraham starts to ripple down through the generations, and it shows how God's plan works through some very human and honestly very messy family dynamics. The family tree is pretty direct. The promise goes from Abraham to his son, Isaac. Isaac then has a son named Jacob, who ends up having 12 sons of his own.
And after a whole lot of family drama, one of those sons, Joseph, ends up in a position of incredible power in Egypt, which sets the stage for what comes next.
And right here, we see that first part of the promise coming true. Jacob's 12 sons, they become the founding fathers of the 12 tribes that will grow into the nation of Israel.
So, generations fly by, and that promise of becoming a great nation, it happened. Abraham's descendants are now a huge population. But there is a massive problem. They aren't in their own land. They're living in Egypt, and they've become slaves, oppressed by the most powerful empire in the world.
Which leaves us with this huge, critical question. God made a covenant, a promise to bless this family. And they're now a nation, just like he said. But they are in chains. How on earth can God's promise be fulfilled now? This very question sets the stage for the next epic chapter in the Bible's story, the Exodus.